Thank you all for joining us today. Please let me know if you're unable to see or to hear, but we'll get started. I'm very excited. We have some special guests today as we're talking about the mastering the matrix, which is what we call here more to do with the API. We have with us Alex Poole and John Fluman. We're happy that they're joining us. Welcome.
Thank you.
Their enthusiasm level is quite high today as we're talking about the API. As you guys have any questions, please feel free to chat those in. We want to hear what questions you have, as well as any other thoughts that you have regarding the API so that we can help you best. Our agenda today is to first talk about the API fundamentals, what it is, how you use it, and provide some additional resources for you. So if you're new to looking at Mozenda's API, this will give you some context. If you are experienced with the API, we have Alex and John here. They're going to be talking about the API and how to automate these calls using sequences and the agent builder, and using Python and the API to automate your processes. There's so many possibilities when it comes to the API. So what is the API? I come from a less technical background, and so when I first started working with the API, I wasn't sure what it did and how it was going to benefit me. One thing that is helpful for me to know was the API allows for machine-to-machine or program-to-program to query. So it removes any of that UX barriers, and so that you're just able to get the data that you need. So in Mozenda, this allows you to control the agents you have, the data that you have, without manually accessing the web console. Our team here uses the API to query how many agents for our services team and our deliveries to see how many agents are in an error state or have completed, because it's able to do actions at a mass scale, removing some of the UX barriers that are there. I like everyday examples, and as I was researching the API, I saw two examples. One was with Tinder and how they integrate with Facebook in order to show your frequent friends or similar friends. And the other was here with Uber, and Uber had tried some different mapping integrations where they use so that they don't have to build their own maps because somebody already has that information for them. And they were able to use Google Maps to integrate that. Because they integrated between both Uber and Google, we now have these wonderful maps. They don't have to build their own system, and it pulls that data right into it. So that's one example. As you're seeing your apps in your everyday life, it's likely that there's some integration across the board. So now, how can the API be used in Mozenda?
And obviously a few things can be said as well. So anytime you want to run an agent, the API can execute that for you. Anytime you want to get the data from the agent that's just run, again, the API can do that. The API can also be used as a status checker, essentially, to check how your job is going, if it's in an error status, if it's pausing, or if it's finished. And soon, we'll be able to set schedules to the API as well.
Which is so exciting. Just this. This is something our product manager came in just this week and told us that they're like, oh, let them know that schedules are coming soon. So if that's something that you're excited for, feel free to let us know. That will be helping you as well. Some of the top 10 API calls that we have, and this is actually research that Alex has done in interviewing different clients as being part of the product team. What have you found to be, like, what did you learn?
Yeah, so I actually pulled all of the backend data of all of the API calls that have been run on Mozenda. And this was a few months back, but it was pretty consistent that view.getItems was the most common done action, which makes sense because those are individuals that are wanting to pull the data that Mozenda is getting. And I'll actually use that one later and show you how you can use that. And then agent.run, which allows you to run agents, but not need to be constricted by the web console to do so. Collection.getList returns a list of all your collections. Job.get, like John mentioned, we often want to check the status of jobs and how they're running. So job.get allows us to know where certain jobs are at in the process, be it a web harvest job where you're running an agent or a publishing job. And then agent.getList returns a list of all your agents. Agent.get, you can see specific details for an agent, and then collection.addItem, you can add items to a collection. And all of this information and way more is in our help center. And so Georgia will go over that more.
I love that. Something that API is so helpful for me at least, is to think of the role in the company as managers or as high-level team members. If you want to check the status of what's going on, but you may not be able to like spend all your time researching inside the web console, this is going to be great. We had somebody that's so excited that scheduling will be great for them. So that's so awesome. Thanks for letting us know. We're going to, just as a keynote for you, this will be sent out to all of you who have registered for the webinar, and a recording of this will be posted on YouTube. So if you want to share it with your team later, that will be posted there. So what is an API call? An API call is a URL that retrieves data, and it requires different parameters to determine what type of actions are going to be performed. This is a screenshot or an example of what an agent run job would be for Mozenda's REST API. You can see that there is a name. There is whether or not it is required. You'll say true or false. Not all API calls that we have here at Mozenda do have required fields. So just take a look at that. We also have the type, and this will help you identify it. And that tells you what this will look like. I'll show you an example so that you can become familiar with where you'll find the agent ID as well as the view ID. When the API returns, it will let you know whether or not it was a success and some different information regarding the API call that you did. If I did view.getItemList, then I could get a view. I could get all of the items that are in that specific view. This is extremely helpful, especially for if you're tracking changes and you want to see if something has been changed or removed. You could do an API call to get that information. All your response would be listed below, and then it will allow you to scrape that data. But there's something unique about your API URL. So if everybody just had a URL to access anybody's database to get your data, then it could get pretty rowdy really quickly. So we have permissions for APIs called your web service key. This is a unique characters that are given to your account. If you don't know where your web service key is, then just log into your account, select summary, and click on user. When you get to your user, you'll be able to click on your name and generate the API code. So you can see here, I already had one generated, and I recreated that new web service key. If you do recreate your web service key, it will write over any, like let me fix all your other API calls. This is what the URL will look like. We have our web service key entered in here, and then the action listed at the end. We're going to practice this just really quickly. We're going to go into our API. You can see we have our agent ID, which is required, so I'm going to use that. And we're going to use this URL as a way to get that. We need to grab our web service key. So I'm going to pull over my account and click on my person. And then I'm going to go to the users. And as I'm going through this, I'm going to point out where you can find specific views that will be used throughout. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm not going to change anything. I'm going to go to my agents. You can see that I have specific agents. I have 1069. That's the agent ID. If I click into these agents and I want to view the view ID, it's going to be up here in the top right hand corner. If you have multiple views, you can see as you hover next to that, it will display the view that you're going to be working with. Just keep that in mind as you're building your URL. I'm going to pull up a notepad because this is easier. Well, actually, this is something that I love so much is on our documentation, we have something called Postman, where Postman allows you to test your API call. And I don't see it on here. Do you see it, Alex?
Yeah, you have to go to REST API introduction, and then you can click run in Postman right here. And I have Postman installed on my computer already, so.
And if you don't, you'll just need to install it, and it will have the API calls. That's where we put our API calls to make it easier for you to test and fix.
So this will create a collection with, since I already have it, I don't really need it. So this has a collection with all of the calls just
This makes it
right
so
there.
much easier. So if I want to do agent.run job, then I could just select agent run. And all I would need to do is just change, I'd select which fields I'm going to be using. I'm going to change, I can change my agent number if I need to, but we'll just stick with 1003. And then we'll replace that with our web service. This makes it so much easier. Like I said, when I first started using this, I was using a notepad, but then as soon as I started using Postman, it was so easy to test this because I could just put in the fields that I needed, and then it was able to execute that call pretty quickly. So we were able to send that request, and this is what was returned.
Yeah, and another cool thing that I often do with my requests and everything is just in case you like don't have Postman available or something, you can run the API directly in your browser and see the results there.
So make sure that you do have api.mozenda.com and it has HTTP, I think it's with the slash, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so you can see that request right there. So that's just another way that you can test and, you know, play with the API.
And if you're ever, the documentation does show you what the request will look like once it is returned, and let you know if that's going to be, so that you can just always monitor if that's the right result. For example, this one says success, which is good for us, and that just ran agent 1003. So if you need any more information on the API, please refer to our help center. There's so much documentation on the API. We're going to jump into what I think is really fun, which is where you can use the agent builder and the web console in order to optimize your project.
Awesome. Yeah. So when you're looking at the API, we're really trying to save ourselves time. Whether that's time interfacing with the web console or time repeating menial tasks, the API can help us automate those processes. One of the things that I love to do is really from a high level think what I need to get working inside of my either my web console or inside of my process so that I can save myself time on the end.
Because somebody asked, I asked some people here that use our API quite frequently, why do you use the API and when do you use the API? You know, like when there's something that I know, like I can see the information is there, but there's not a direct action in Mozenda to execute what I want. And so I'm able to look at the API call and see what information is available and build, basically like build backwards to get the data.
Exactly.
I'm really excited for this.
So inside of my account, I have built 4 agents that are going to utilize the API so that I don't have to essentially set my publishing settings for all of my agents. That's something that I do often with the big projects that I have for myself, and setting publishing settings for 100 different agents at a time is time consuming. So,
Sounds like a lot.
It's a lot of fun, but I need to make sure I schedule a lot of time for that fun. I can use agent groups, but if my agents don't fit into the same template, that solution's not going to work for me either. So instead, I can use the API to set those publishing settings for me so that I don't have to take the time. All I need to do is make sure that my API calls are written so that they can handle all of it as soon as I hit run. So for my process, I've built 4 separate agents that are going to get me the information that I need in order to have my publishing settings set correctly. My first agent is get collections. This is going to go into my account and pull all of the collection IDs, which is the unique identifier for each collection, so that I can make sure that they get set correctly when I'm trying to set the publishing settings. When I open up the agent builder for this agent, you'll see that it's fairly simple. We're going to only use a load page action and then an item list. Because API calls are URLs that we use to start an action, the load page action will actually initiate that API call for us. So once that API call has been executed, I can capture the information that I need directly from the agent builder using an item list.
Could you walk us through this item list specifically? How could we, if this is the first time somebody's looking at an API call and seeing the list of their item list, how can they familiarize themselves with what they're looking at?
Yeah, it's a great question. So inside of XML, everything is built into a hierarchy, and that's how our API is returned, is in an XML format. You can, yeah. So the default is XML, but any API call can also be returned JSON. So when looking at my XML, I can see that I have an item list, and that inside of the item list, I have items. Each item is going to have various headers that represent the different fields that you could see inside of that view or inside of that item. So from my web console, since I'm pulling all of the collections, all of these are returned as fields that I would see in the web console. So for instance, here's the name. Here is the status of that agent. Here's the agent ID. Here's the domain that it's built on. Here's who it was modified. So I did this one last. And here's the collection ID. In this case, for my process, this is the field that I need. And so this API call allows me to grab the collection ID.
Yeah, and just to kind of build off of that just really quickly, if you want more information about the specific objects being returned, we do have that documented here where you can go and see really all of that information, the definition of it.
Once I've my set publisher takes all of the information I've gathered from my view IDs and my collection IDs to help me automate the process of adding the same publishing settings to each agent. So similarly, this agent only has a load page and then a capture to make sure that my API call executed successfully. The API call in this case allows me to add all of the information that I'll need so that my agent can publish correctly. For instance, a method. So I'm going to publish with the FTP, and my server is test.mozendawebinar.com. But all this information I can load into my API call, so I only have to enter in that information a single time. On page 2, my capture action is just verifying that this publishing setting was executed correctly. Exactly. Yep. It removes any guesswork that this hasn't worked correctly. And so I know that once this agent is complete, all of my collections will be published into the same place. So for me, this is the way that I've used API to help some of my high-level processes, but there's a lot of other ways that you can use the API in Mozenda as well.
Next. The process we'll go through. I'm going to show you the Power BI document that I made by accessing Mozenda Data. We'll look at the API docs to really understand the call. Then we'll use Postman to both make the call, make sure it works, and you can convert to code in Postman. So I'm going to convert it into Python. I'll show you where I'm running the code and the adaptations I made in order to get it in the right format, and then ultimately just connecting Power BI directly to the API. So, oh, you're good. Let me pull it up. Oops, sorry. Okay. So here is this Power BI document where I have restaurants, restaurant rating, and restaurant reviewers. And I'll show you what that looks like also in Mozenda. So in Mozenda here, you'll be able to see that I'm capturing a table with that has the restaurant name, a restaurant rating, and restaurant reviewers, and all of the things. Here it is. So here's my view, and you can see the view ID is 1170. We already got my web service key before, as Georgia showed. And so here you can see I have this table that I pulled in directly from Mozenda, and I'm ultimately looking at the average ratings for these restaurants and the average number of reviewers. So this is a pretty small data set. There's only about 208, I think, restaurants that I'm pulling information from. And the API does work for, obviously, like bigger data pulls. It just would take more time. So now we're going to go into the documentation, and I'm going to be using view.getItems to pull this data. And so here you can see all I need is the view ID, and then I already have my web service key. So yeah, and we're going to go ahead and pull that into Postman. So this is the only one where you can actually pull back the objects that Mozenda is giving. So since I'm wanting to pull back this information specifically from this view, then view.getItems is really my only option for to be able to do that. And that's why it's the most common executed call, because a lot of people will use it to optimize how they're pulling the information, because sometimes the publishing settings are not totally sufficient for covering all of the needs that a person might have. So we're in Postman, and then I already have this open. I already filled in the view ID, and I can practice and send that request. So here's the request. It was a success. There's 208 items total, and that means there's only one page, because the API is limited in the fact that it will only return 1,000 items at a time. So if you have more than 1,000 items, you'll have to paginate. And now I'll show you. I'm also seeing have more items. Okay, and so here I can go to code, and Postman is awesome because it will convert just an API request into whatever code you would need. So I'm mainly familiar with Python, so I'm using Python-request. And I'm not using this exact call. It's adapted a little bit, but I will show you how I changed it right here. So I pulled this into Google Colab, where you can create Python scripts. And I mentioned right here, the API can run pretty slow. So if you are running lots of pages, you're going to want to make sure that it's nailed down. And yeah.
Oh, it looks like we are muted. So hold on one second.
Are you able to hear us now? Awesome.
Beautiful.
It's fun to hear all of your yeses. We also have, okay, we just hear you. Awesome. Perfect. And then there was another question that I just wanted to answer right now. This will be posted on YouTube by Monday, so you'll be able to have access to that. We had some great comments on scheduling as well, so thank you for commenting about being able to suspend a schedule. So if that's something that relates to more than just one of you, please let us know.
Yeah, so that's actually included in the scheduling API. So that will be possible once that is released.
I hope one of you is very happy. And then we're going to, I'll have you just continue with this. Here you go.
Yeah, awesome. So someone asked if we could also share this Google Colab, and I want to make sure it's in like tip-top condition before we do that. But if you can, we'll keep track of who's interested in that, and we can just send it to you directly. So anyway, back to the good stuff. So in order to be able to run this, I needed to make sure I had pandas and requests, those Python libraries. And digging into those, requests allows us to be able to ultimately make that API request. And then we use pandas to convert to data frames. And then I found this library that helps with converting from XML into eventually long-term into data frames, and I'll show kind of how we do that. So first I make this request, and I want to be able to know how many pages that I'm going to need to paginate through, because I'll end up using this pagination. Someone asked about more than 1,000 requests. And so initially more than 1,000 requests, more than 1,000 items. When I initially wrote this, I was accessing a data set that had probably about 12,000 rows of data. So I definitely needed to use this pagination. In this case, it would only go through it once because there is only one page of data. So I run this request again, and then I paginate through the items and add those to a data frame, and then ultimately there's the data frame. So kind of a really brief overview. If we do share this, I'll make sure to comment it really carefully so you guys can have an idea of what's going on.
And additionally, if this is something we would be helpful to you to provide snippets of some of the codes that we've used with JavaScript, with our API, as well as some JavaScript actions to execute inside the builder, please let us know, because we want to provide documentation and resources for you that will be helpful in your projects. So if there is something, or there's, we'll definitely look into how we can incorporate that and if it aligns with our current timeline needs, but please let us know.
Yeah, awesome. And one thing to keep in mind as I move over to Power BI, moving this into Power BI, it did take quite a bit of troubleshooting for me to make sure that everything was just right in the code for that to be able to work. For
How
instance,
long do you think you spent building this?
so I initially built this probably like 4-ish months ago, maybe more, I don't remember. And that didn't take me super long, just maybe a few hours of kind of researching both how to deal with the request and using Postman. And then the hardest part for me was converting from XML into a data frame. That took a significant amount of time. And I ended up doing XML to element tree, and then the element tree into the data frame. So
Awesome.
it's probably super convoluted, but it worked. That's what counts. So I'm just going to copy this data. And like I said, there were some issues with like my initial trying to get it into Power BI. So you have to have the right libraries, and it will kind of walk you through, and there's a lot of information online. I also had to make sure that it was encoded ASCII, because UTF-8 wasn't working, if you're familiar with those. So I'm going to go to Get Data in Power BI, hit More, and then it'll take a second to load. Go to Other, and a Python script. So pretty straightforward on this end. And then I just paste this information in there, hit OK, and it'll just take a second to both run the request and like connect to Python. And so this is super helpful if you're trying to create a dashboard to connect directly with Mozenda. So it looks like I had a typo in there somewhere where I think my mouse was just on the wrong thing, and I added a G right here, so I just got to delete that.
Oh, good catch.
Yeah, so I saw that in the error that it popped up and gave me, I was able to see that that was the issue. And here you can see shortly as it loads.
Sometimes I like when it does take a while to load, because a lot of times it, like, that's reality, you know?
Oh, for sure. And so it has 2 data frames, because the second one was how I was adding to my first data frame. So I'm just going to pull this first data frame and load it, and it should create a new table. So it's reevaluating the first table that I ran, which is the same information, and then adding this other one. So yeah, generally speaking, that's how that works. Someone asked what version of Power BI this is. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I will look that up as we're going through the Q&A. And
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. There's a few questions here. One of the questions was, if we use the API, how will that affect our processing credits? And with their, I think Alex, we'd briefly talked about this, but it's similar to a processing credit is related to a request. And so when you load a new URL that's executing your navigation request, which would require a processing credit. Do you have more context on that?
yeah, so if you are doing what John did, you're probably going to want to make sure that you're just on standard harvesting, because you want to, maximize your credit usage. And if you're on standard harvesting, it should only be 1 processing credit per request. So the first couple requests that John did where he was getting the collection items and the view items, those would only be 1 processing credit each, most likely. And then the second one, or the third one that he ran where he was sending the publisher, each publisher that he set, since it's a different URL request, it would require a processing credit in order to run.
Awesome. And one of the other questions that was brought up was how, if there's going to be any, if there was going to be any API calls related to agent groups, and we have added that into our timeline so that we can, because that's been a need and an ask by a couple customers. We have one that says, how can I use the API to update a collection with a CSV file with a similar field name? There's some, John, do you want to, you look very concentrated on that.
Yeah, so we do have API calls to edit field values inside of a collection. And that's all documented inside of our help center. So there are various calls that can help on this item.
So it would be because it's specific to a collection, to help navigate yourself through the help center, I would recommend going to collections first, and then you can see where it has add item or updated value or updated field here. And this will point you in the right direction to get there. Thank you so much for asking.
Yeah, so for that case specifically, this collection.add item is what you're looking for. And then you can do a post request and actually, you would have to convert the CSV, I believe, into XML or JSON. And then you can just add those items in bulk to a collection.
What other questions do you have? Feel free to chat those in while we're wrapping up. If there's any additional ones, please feel free to email those to us and we'll be happy to get back to you. I know that the code was really important to you all to receive as well, so we'll send that out in our post email. And join us next month. We're going to be talking about harvesting settings and how to optimize your projects with request blocking, as well as with some different proxy locations. If there's more information or more topics that you'd like to discuss, please let us know. And we'll look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you all so much.